Miti-Drummond, who will be joining us for a chat. And my name is Ramatoulie Jallow, as I said, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. And she will not be alone on this program, but she'll be accompanied by a list of several distinguished human rights experts, practitioners, and academics that are active in the space for advocating for the rights of persons with albinism, including the former mandate holder, Ms. I.K. Arrow, who handed over her seat to Ms. Drummond in August 2021, this year. And we know from the factual background in relation to the rights of persons with albinism in particular, that there has been loads of instances that are recorded in relation to murder, the mutilation of body parts, and other harmful practices that are aimed at persons with albinism relating to ritual attacks that have been recorded specifically in Eastern and Southern Africa. And in light of this, this is what makes this conversation relevant. In essence, this will be then a chat just to understand the mandate of the UN independent expert and how her place falls in relation to advancing the rights of persons with albinism in the world and also across our continent. And it'll also be an opportunity to network as organizations and practitioners in the space. And also this platform is an opportunity to recognize the National Albinism Awareness Month that took place in South Africa in September, in the hope that it would also encourage other states across the country, across the continent, across the globe, to also have the same initiative in relation to a month of recognition. And so I'd just like to, before handing over the program to our first speaker, I'd like to give a special thanks to the Disability Rights Unit under the Center for Human Rights, the Disability Student Unit under the University of Venda, and of course the mandate of the UN Independent Expert on the Enjoyment of Human Rights by Persons with Albinism for organizing this event, which is the start of many more to come. And with this, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Professor Frans Viljoen. He is the director of the Center for Human Rights, who will be giving us our welcoming remarks. I give you the floor, Professor Frans. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And it's my great pleasure and privilege on behalf of the Center for Human Rights to welcome you all, every participant, all our honored guests, to this, I think, really groundbreaking event. We like to advertise it, and it certainly is a first of its kind. And I think it's within the ambit of raising greater awareness, greater understanding, not only of the mandate of the independent expert, but also of the issues that affect persons living with albinism, people with albinism. So it is my privilege then to say something very brief about the center, and from that to highlight two reasons why in particular this is an event very dear to the heart of the center. Now, the Center for Human Rights, as many of you know, is on the one hand an academic department in the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria. So we run a master's program and doctoral programs. And it is within the ambit of these master's program in particular that we have the privilege of collaborating with the School of Law, Faculty of Law at the University of Venda. So Professor Bantwini, Dr. Mbuva, you are most welcome. You are here also in the framework of a long-standing, much valued and appreciated collaboration between the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria and yourselves, and more broadly, the University of Venda. So we treasure this event and this collaboration. We've had in the past, for example, had the jointly organized Helen Kanzira lecture and many other events. And linked to this is the fact that our moderator and one of the main organizers of the event are also two students presently on this master's program, Ms. Jallow and Mr. Dako, and others who are assisting them. This is the link back to the academic programs at the center and this event. On the other hand, the center is also, if you like, a civil society organization or an NGO. We raise our own funds, we devise and we implement projects to advance human rights. In Africa, we have observer status with the African Commission, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and UNESCO. And it is within the framework of this part of the center that we have a number of units that focus on advocacy and research and capacity building around particular contemporary important human rights themes. And one of those themes is the rights of persons with disabilities. So the unit within the center that occupies itself with this work is the Disability Rights Unit. It is very ably led by the manager of that unit, the acting manager of that unit, Diana Msipa, and I thank and congratulate Diana and the team for setting this up. It is within this framework then of the unit's work, and also I just see, I think the predecessor of the manager of the Disability Rights Unit had also joined us in Essentia, and welcome to you as well. We have been supporting IK, and we have had very long-standing collaboration. We see it as part of this unit's very, very important work to support the mandate of the independent expert, not only because the independent expert before and presently are Africans located in Africa, working on and in Africa, but also because the issue of albinism, persons with albinism, is such a pervasive issue and an issue of such prevailing concern for us within the African continent. So for these reasons, we really are very, very fortunate, Ms. Muluka Miti-Drummond, that you are here. You are the star of the show. It's your new position, the position of the independent experts that we want to focus on this afternoon. Evidently, we wish you all the best for the period for which you will serve, and we pledge our support, and I'm sure everyone present here pledge their support. We wish this would be a start of more awareness and deeper understanding both of your mandate and of the thematic issues involved. So thank you once again to you, to everyone else, and we trust this will be a very productive and meaningful event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Frans, for your opening remarks. It's indeed going to be a very enlightening conversation and a really great opportunity to welcome our new UN independent expert to the floor, and to thank her for also sparing the time to chat with us. And now I'd like to invite our next speaker to the floor, who is Professor Bongani Bantwini, who is the Executive Dean under the Faculty for Humanities, Social Science and Education at the University of Venda. Prof, I give you the floor. Okay, it would seem that Prof is yet to join us on the call. Perhaps we will make time for him to just give us a few remarks. But in the meantime, I can perhaps hand over to Ms. I.K. Arrow, who will be giving us our keynote address. Ms. Arrow, are you there?
I am. Hello. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And I really wish to thank the Center for Human Rights, which Frans leads. And it was an amazing time working with you in the past few years while I served as mandate holder. Your support was unwavering, especially through the disability unit with Innocencia at the helm, and toward the end with Diana. It was a good collaboration that bore a lot of fruit, especially with the AU mechanisms, the Pan-African Parliament. We had a couple of resolutions come out of there. We are waiting for the Pan-African Parliament to adopt the guidelines on harmful practices, which is the first of its kind. So this was really an amazing collaboration, and I'm glad to hear that you're committed to taking that forward with my successor, Anne-Muluka. It is, I think you should please bear with me. My family got some devastating news from Nigeria this morning. So we're trying to cope, and I'm trying to put my thoughts together. But I thought it was important to still show up here, because I know how much they support albinism, not in the least because of just me, but because of all the children with albinism across the continent who are still struggling. And We know that as of yesterday, there was a grave desecration in Tanzania of a man, 40 years old, who had died a year before. His name is Harry, H-E-R-I, and he died the year before from skin cancer. Now, I bring up the story of Harry because I think it's quintessentially an example of what's still going on, unfortunately. So Harry was in his 30s, working in a hospital as an intern in the lab, and he had applied for a scholarship with an organization, civil society organization in Tanzania, who gave out such scholarships to study a certificate in public health. He got the scholarship because he qualified, because he was poor generally, and then finished his education in his 30s, public health, and then went ahead to apply for his master's degree. In the meantime, his family decided to settle down. He had 2 children, and then the lab tech position he had was made permanent. So then he got a permanent position because the hospital was impressed. The irony of the whole situation, which tends to be the theme with albinism, lots of paradoxes and ironies that, aside from teaching us philosophical lessons, such as being white and black at the same time, also show the difficulty in solving the human rights issues. So Harry contracted skin cancer along the way. How this was missed is very baffling for somebody who works in a hospital who was supported by an albinism NGO. His cancer spread and essentially was too late. He died at the age of 1975. He died last year, so that would make him, 45, if I'm not mistaken. He dies, and then he is buried this year. His family woke up yesterday and his body was gone, including the coffin. Everything was taken. Before Harry's grave desecration last week, there was a case of a child in Zambia who was attacked, and now there's about 5 of them in the last 13 months who have mutilated bodies. So all of this to say is not just to keep hammering on this bad news and saying, oh, look how terrible the situation is. It is terrible, but I always try to honor the victims, to remember why we're doing what we're doing. None of us are here to serve ourselves. We're here to serve those who are not on Zoom calls at this hour of the day because they don't have access and they don't have the voice, they don't have the representation at their local level. I'm here to hammer the fact that this idea of attacking people with albinism is a harmful practice. We as human rights advocates have to start speaking more about these issues. No one else will, because it's very peculiar, as Frans said, to our continent. Harmful practices have been early child marriage. They have been female genital mutilation, which is all valid. But we need to add on that grotesque list the idea of mutilations and going after people simply because of the way they look and using their body parts for whatever rituals. We need to be more vocal in this idea of harmful practices. I'm glad to say that the UN adopted a resolution towards the end of my tenure. After so many engagements and so many struggles, the UN finally adopted a resolution on harmful practices. Now, isn't it ironic that it was the UN who did this before our continent? Even more sad is that we have a guideline that we developed, myself as a mandate holder in collaboration with the disability unit at the center and the Pan-African Parliament in this tripartite relationship, developed these guidelines that I think are amazing, if I can say so myself. And the current mandate holder was involved in that. And we are yet to adopt that. We're waiting for the Pan-African Parliament to settle down and do its job and adopt that so that we can get to work in implementing those guidelines, which are quite straightforward and very useful. I think this is one of the biggest areas not covered in the human rights of people with albinism. Other parts such as right to health, education, there are frameworks already in place. We just need them to become concrete. We need them to be implemented for people with albinism with specific measures. And on that note, I wish to highlight that the the African Union adopted a plan of action that is regional. From the name you can see, the plan of action with its implementation matrix can be found online at actiononalbinism.org, and you can see that many measures are covered there. That plan of action is in line with the SDGs, so it's going to run from now to 2031. So we have a lot of hope. In conclusion, my hope is also tied to the fact that this issue is solvable. We know that a lot of human rights issues can be fatiguing because you're wondering, when is this going to end? And we've been fighting for this right since 1944. But on this issue, I've watched tremendous success. I've seen skin cancer deaths go from 80% to about 40%. Also, we have seen country situations where there was no albinism groups, now they are. Most of the funded albinism groups in the world are in Africa. There are 39 in the world that are funded, about 40 to 50,000 USD per year. 34 out of 39 are in Africa. So we now have the Africa Albinism Network, which I'm helping to build with technical advice and strategy that is running around the continent trying to implement the plan of action. So without taking any more time, there is a lot of hope because this issue is solvable because of all of you. I know that in 10 years, hopefully, most of this will be really historical and in the past. So thank you for listening, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for your kind words and for also centering us in relation to just giving this issue the solemnity that it deserves, and talking about the victims that have suffered and have lost their lives in relation to this issue, and also just pointing out the progress and the room for hope as we progress and develop. And with this, I'd now like to invite Mr. Kwame Andrew Staklu for introductory remarks. Kwame is a student here under the Human Rights and Democratization in Africa program under the Center for Human Rights, and is an intern or an international relations officer under the University of Venda, and an avid activist in the space of persons with albinism. And I am privileged to invite him to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramatoulie. Hope you can hear me. Yeah, thank you, Ramatoulie, once again for the excellent work and the opportunity to give the introductory remark on this day. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, everyone. It is very important that persons with albinism are put on the radar so that situations can be adequately dealt with. And to continue, I must first of all extend my appreciation to the three institutions that make this event possible, namely the Disability Rights Unit at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, the Disability Students Unit at the University of Venda, where I am an intern, and the mandate of the independent experts on the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism. I must also thank Mr. Prof. Frans for making time to join us. Same goes to Prof. Bongani. I'm sure he will join us soon, or maybe he's already in the meeting. And Ms. Ike-Ero, Ms. Muluka, and Dr. Mbova for their time. We really appreciate this as the albinism community. Now, to continue, I must also extend my appreciation to all of us for joining this virtual event, which is the first of its kind. And these discussions are very dear to what we are as advocates for the rights of persons with albinism in Africa. I use this opportunity to welcome every one of us here once again. And please give me a few minutes to just take you through how the Center for Human Rights, the Disability Unit, is related to albinism. Ike has mentioned a lot that has been done with the center and how they are also helping to advance the cause that we all push for. And as Prof. Frans mentioned earlier, the Center for Human Rights, or the Disability Unit is under the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. The unit aims to contribute, that is the Disability Unit, aim to contribute to the international disability rights discourse by assisting and collaborating with international organizations, academic partners, and civil society across the globe in taking targeted measures to advance the rights of persons with disabilities, including those with albinism. In doing so, the unit is committed to finding evidence-based ways of addressing the rights of persons with disabilities on the African continent. These include researching international disability rights standards and instruments, building capacity among governments, national human rights institutions, academia, civil society, and communities. In addition, the unit has done a remarkable job on issues relating to albinism, mentioned by IK earlier, but let me just be specific with a few of them that are readily available for your reference. And these include a capacity building workshop held in September 2019 for organizations representing persons with albinism, a webinar on mothers impacted by albinism in generations, which is a photo campaign projecting the stories of persons with albinism. And we have commemoration. The center also issued press releases on the commemoration of International Albinism Awareness Day yearly, and also provided technical support towards the development of the African Union Plan of Action on Albinism in Africa, among others. Now, just a little bit on disability unit at the University of Venda. The disability unit at the University of Venda assists students with disabilities within the university community by providing services such as orientation and mobility training, computer training to develop essential skills for the use of advanced adaptive technology, technical support for visually impaired students with braille and scanning of learning materials. They also train students on how to use these assistive devices. The center is also responsible for providing assistive devices to students with disabilities and also facilitates their examination, writing, facilitates tests and examination for students with disabilities. In addition to all this, the center also organizes various workshops that help to enhance the academic performance of persons with disability within the environment. Now, and the third organization or institution responsible for putting this event together is the independent expert, the mandate of the independent expert on the enjoyment of human rights by a person with albinism. But for me to speak on this, I would rather launch us into the objectives of the day, since this form part of our objective of the day. So going straight into that, first objective of the day is to create awareness about the mandate of the UN independent experts on albinism and its roles in advancing advocacy on albinism in Africa and the world in general. This is to remind ourselves once again what the mandate's aims and objectives are and how we can ensure these objectives are achieved. What the aim is to provide us with a clear understanding of the rules of the mandate and what mandate holder expect from us as persons with albinism and vice versa. I think in the past we have worked with IK and we have been flooding here with a lot of information. So today's aim is to help us to know whether we should or should not flood the independent experts amidst their numerous work with a lot of information, trying to let them post it on their Facebook walls or other social medias. So our aim is to just have a clear understanding, and the current independent experts, Ms. Anne-Muluka Anne, would have the opportunity to at least run us through all these ones. And the second objective for the day is to create good working relations between the independent experts, activists, and leaders of albinism-related associations and civil society organizations advancing the rights of persons with albinism in Africa. Yes, so this is basically about forging a good working relation with the IEs and building alliances to increase awareness of the condition. We, the albinism community, cannot handle this alone, and therefore we must build and maintain alliances with those who understand our condition and are ready to support us to spread the information that everyone needs to know. It's because of misunderstanding of the condition of albinism that leads to discrimination and the mutilation of our body parts, as just narrated by Ms. Ike. Even if we are dead, our bones are not rested. It's rather unfortunate to hear this at this time also. And our last objective of the day will be to commemorate National Albinism Awareness Month in South Africa, and also to encourage other states to adopt the same. And we all know that South Africa has declared September as a National Albinism Awareness Day, and which is a very great initiative to have a month dedicated to albinism awareness. And I think all of us from various countries, we need to start advancing or advocating for this initiative to be implemented in our countries, so that at least we have a month that we can organize various fora and workshops to educate the public on albinism. And we should all bring on board our views on how we can implement this in our various countries. Before I conclude, it is essential to reiterate that persons with albinism continue to suffer human rights violations, including right to life, security of persons, torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, right to education, and the right to health, among others. It is most concerning to note that more persons with albinism die due to skin cancer than attacks and ritual murder. It is known that 90% of persons with albinism die before their 40th birthdays due to this deadly but curable and preventable disease. Recent studies suggest that 95% of persons with albinism develop skin lesions, which is a precursor to skin cancer if left untreated. This is a study conducted in urban centers in Togo. Now we can all imagine the situation in rural areas, and these rural areas are known for their limited access to healthcare facilities, goods, and services. Skin cancer is a serious threat to the albinism community, and urgent action is needed to stop the rate at which it is eating away our bodies. Not to raise tensions high, since this discussion can take a whole session, I would want to conclude by extending my appreciations to Dr. Segun Obadere and his team at the Directorate of International Relations and Partnership, the University of Venda, for facilitating this collaboration, and also to Ms. Diana at the Center for Human Rights and her team for making this event possible. I am very optimistic that this will not be a one-off event. There will be a second live chat, a third, and this continues. So let us all come on board and share our ideas, suggestions, and what can be done to improve the situations of persons with albinism in Africa. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kwame, for those introductory remarks. Thank you so much, Kwame, for those introductory remarks and for just centering us in terms of what we achieve, what we intend to accomplish today, in terms of our objectives for the day, and also just highlighting still some of the major critical areas that need to be addressed in relation to persons with albinism. And now, having laid that groundwork, I'd now love to open the floor to the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of rights by human rights by persons with albinism, Ms. Muluka Anne Miti-Drummond. It is a privilege to have you on this call with us. We welcome you to this platform. We are looking forward to hearing more about the mandate from you and also just your thoughts around the space. And for everyone who's on this call, there'll be a question and answer session after Ms. Muluka's presentation. So I would encourage participants to just write their questions in the chat box and also just prepare themselves if they wish to ask any questions. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and IK, good morning, because I know you are in Canada and quite very early morning for you over there. Thank you for joining us and attending this, even though it's so early for you. For the Portuguese speakers, boa tarde, bem-vindo, muito obrigada por a vossa presença aqui. I've seen that some people were asking for translation. I'm not sure if it is available, but just to say, I am also available to do similar live chats in Portuguese if you'd be interested in that. I think I would be very remiss if I didn't start by saying how, when Kwame asked me to do this, I was obviously very happy and delighted to do it. And we had a few more conversations, and I think it was in our third conversation when I discovered that I was actually doing this together with my two alma maters. So I'm very happy to be attending this, knowing that I graduated from the University of Venda in 2000, and I graduated from the University of Pretoria Faculty of Law, not the Center for Human Rights, but the Faculty of Law of the University of Pretoria in about 2002. So it's a great privilege for me to be having this conversation with two of the three universities, not four universities that I went to. And in some ways, this kind of feels a little bit incestuous as well, knowing that I've worked very closely with the center as well and with IK prior to taking on the mandate. So yes, once again, thank you for giving me the space to speak. I've already been introduced. I know a number of people have asked me a couple of times about my name and how it is properly pronounced, but it's been pronounced properly today. My name is Muluka Anne Miti-Drummond, the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of rights by persons with albinism. Excuse me if I keep touching my ear, I've got headset in and it seems to be falling out. So I started my mandate at the end of August or beginning of August, and I've been in place for just about 2 months now. It has been interesting to be to speak with persons with albinism from across the globe. As I said at the beginning of my mandate, when I started my mandate, I see my role as amplifying the voices of persons with albinism. My role is not to replace those voices, but to amplify the voices. And in doing that, it is very important for me to be able to work with persons with albinism, receive information from various associations and groups from across the globe. And I have been very privileged in order to do that as well. And it is very important for me to have sessions such as this, to be open to have discussions. And I am available for questions and open for questions at any moment. And Kwame asked, whether it was appropriate for people to be sending me information. Yes, please. Information is very important for me, and I'm always available to receive the information and really keen to receive the information. I am very grateful to receive the information via social media, but it is also very useful for me to receive information in a more formalized process, in a way that will help me to respond to concerns that are raised, to raise these concerns with authorities, and to take action in response to those. Sometimes it is not always easy to do so when information is only delivered via social media. It's also quite important as well, if I receive any information, that I have the consent of families involved to share the information and to raise the information with authorities. This session today, the kind of objective was to enable people to speak to me and to ask me questions, and not for me to speak so much. So I am not going to say very much, and I will just wait. I'm more than happy to respond to questions. and happy to to answer anything that you may have. So thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much. I do have a few questions here that have been received priorly, so I can just address you with them. The first question that I have here is in relation to the resolution that was passed on the 5th of July 2021 this year by the UN Human Rights Council. That's in relation to the elimination of harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual killing. So the question is, how exactly does this resolution relate to albinism, and what is its importance in the cause relating to persons with albinism? And what is the mandate intending to do in light of this resolution, as a first question?
Great, thank you. So some of the issues have already been raised by IK and by Kwame as well. When it comes to persons with albinism, there are lots of superstitions, myths, misinformation that have led to harmful practices against persons with albinism. Harmful practices may relate to the banishment of women, bullying, killing, desecration of graves, mutilations, and often these harmful practices are related to ritual attacks based on this superstition myth that the bones or body parts of persons with albinism can bestow some kind of fortune, wealth, or good luck on a person who uses them. And because of that, persons with albinism are often attacked or have their bodies, their graves desecrated. So this resolution, the UN resolution that was adopted recently by the United Nations, tackles these kind of harmful practices, these ritual attacks, and it calls on states to take steps to prevent these. It calls on states to take steps in the legislation, but it also calls on the UN to carry out a study on harmful attacks and based on witchcraft and ritual attacks. So this is a study that the UN will be carrying out at some point, and the UN will be calling for information. So it's very important that persons with albinism, associations, organizations, and states as well provide relevant information regarding harmful practices against persons with albinism, which are associated to witchcraft and ritual attacks. What I have been doing is raising this resolution with states and with other parties that I have interacted with. On Friday, I presented IK's last report before the UN General Assembly, which dealt with attitudinal barriers. And in that report, we also highlighted this resolution, because I think it is important that states are aware of this resolution, are aware, as IK has stated, that harmful practices are no longer just female genital mutilation or early child marriages, but that we also have to contend with these harmful practices that are related to ritual attacks against persons with albinism, and in some cases even accusations of witchcraft, where people are accused of being witches or causing bad luck because of their albinism, because of having albinism. And in some countries, this may result in people being detained in witch camps, or maybe result in people being banished, chased from their villages. So it's important for states to be aware of this and to take steps to ensure that these practices are not carried out.
Thank you so much for this, and thank you so much for highlighting the opportunity to feed into the research in relation to the UN, and also the need for legislation and the need to raise this with states. Is there any sort of capacity building in relation to the shaping of legislation around the rights of persons with albinism that states could maybe tap into? Are there any model laws in that regard?
So IK has just raised the Pan-African Parliament guidelines, which have not yet been adopted. They are draft guidelines. However, these guidelines will provide a lot of information and advice, recommendations to states on the types of, on legislation basically, and how they can develop legislation, but not just legislation, other measures that can also be taken to ensure elimination of harmful practices. So we're waiting on the Pan-African Parliament to adopt these very important guidelines. And there's also a number of reports that have been written by the mandate by my predecessor, which relate to harmful practices. And the report on harmful practices as well contains recommendations on what states can do, recommendations on the type of legislation and actions that can be done as well in relation to harmful practices. I would like to highlight the last report to the General Assembly from last year on protection of persons with albinism, which contained a section on harmful practices and recommendations on what states can do in relation to this, and specifically what kind of laws are required and what should be contained in those laws to prevent such harmful practices, and as well to ensure accountability for such harmful practices.
Thank you so much for that. And as a next question, and also to the follow-up of the issues that have been raised, there have been of issues raised in relation to the human rights violations that have been suffered by persons with albinism, grave desecration, as you have touched on, and which IK has touched on. The list continues. So how does the mandate intend to address these actions or these violations? Would there be any consideration of possibly dragging states with enormous violation rates to maybe the African Court, or liaising with the African Commission for failure to protect these individuals, or even the committee in relation to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, perhaps?
Right. So the role of the mandate holder is to engage with governments to set standards and guidelines, international standards relating to the protection of the rights of persons with albinism. And since the mandate started in 2015 with IK as the first independent expert on the rights of persons with albinism, there's been a host of standards that have been set in, and a lot of guidelines for states. So states should now be a bit more clear on, what they are required to do. But on top of that, the mandate does engage through country visits, providing technical support and advice to states on how they can further improve the rights of persons with albinism. The mandate also responds to cases, when you receive individual cases of attacks against persons with albinism, raising these cases with the states, asking the states to, to clarify the situation, the circumstances of these, and what is being done to ensure accountability, and basically calling on the state to ensure that those responsible for such attacks are brought to justice, as well as taking steps to ensure that such acts do not occur again. So through the mandate holder, there are also individual complaints kind of procedures that can occur. But when it comes to the African Commission and the Committee for the Protection of the Rights of Persons with Disability, I do not know of any precedents at the moment that has involved independent experts or mandate holders bringing cases before these bodies. It usually is individuals, human rights organizations, and part of the reason for this is because these are bodies, individuals, human rights organizations are on the ground. They're better able to get full information, full factual information, and raise these cases and bring the cases before these bodies. So I'm not aware of any situation in which a mandate holder has done it. Definitely, this is a situation where I could provide support and technical assistance if individuals were interested in doing so. And also, if individuals are interested in raising the cases to the mandate, I'd also be interested, and I'd be in a capacity to raise the cases before the authorities and call on the authorities to ensure that justice is done.
Thank you so much for that. As another question, it seems like what has been highlighted is that on one hand, we have the gross and grievous human rights violations that are suffered by persons with albinism. And on the other hand, we do also have an issue that has been raised already in relation to skin cancer and the fact that 90% of persons with albinism are rated as dying before 40 due to this. So what does this mean for you in relation to your mandate? Do you see any sort of steady shift from maybe more into the health-related issues in relation to persons with albinism? How do you sort of create that balancing exercise in your mandate in ensuring that the issue of health is also spotlighted alongside the issue of human rights violations?
Right, thanks for raising that. So the title of the mandate is Independent Expert on the Enjoyment of Rights by Persons with Albinism. And this is the enjoyment of all rights, not just the right to life, but it's also important to understand that rights are interdependent, they're universal, and a violation of one right can impact the violation of the other right. So the attacks are a concern. They're grievous, atrocious attacks, violations of human rights, the violation of the right to life, which is an absolute right. And so it's not an issue of we're moving away from looking at the attacks. It's an issue of continuing to look at human rights holistically. The right to life is violated when there are attacks against persons with albinism and persons with albinism are killed. But the right to life is also violated where there's an omission, where the state fails to take steps that can prevent foreseeable death. So if the state fails to provide skincare treatment for persons with albinism, sunscreen treatment, or fails to ensure cancer screening or cancer treatment for persons with albinism, this can lead to what could be a preventable death, can lead to skin cancer, and skin cancer can lead to death, which can be a preventable death. So in this case, there is also a violation of the right to life, violating the right to health. And all rights are interrelated as well. So the state failure to ensure that persons with albinism are able to enjoy the right to education by taking, ensuring reasonable accommodation or reasonable adaptations in the workplace can lead to individuals not being able to finish school, and therefore lead to individuals not being able to have a profession, the type of job, or leading to individuals having jobs that require them to be outside in the sun a lot more, labor jobs, which can lead to them then develop higher risk of skin cancer, them developing skin cancer, and then eventually potentially dying. So all rights are interrelated, all rights are important. The approach has been from the beginning and will continue to be that we look at all rights holistically. We look at the rights to education, the right to health, the right to life, access to justice, and looking at it in a multi-sectoral and holistic manner. We've mentioned the African Union Plan of Action in relation to albinism, and this plan of action is also holistic and multi-sectorial. It talks about issues of attacks, issues of health, issues of education and employment. And so the mandate will continue to do that. And just to highlight that, there has been a report as well, and other end reports as well regarding specifically issues of health, issues of, discrimination, and just continuing to look at it holistically.
Thank you so much for that. You're getting a very warm greeting in the chat box as well from everyone who's tuning in across the continent. And I just wanted to pick on some of the questions that I see in the chat box. For instance, I see a question from Jane Betts. The question is, what scope and plans do you have advocating for the inclusion and support of persons with albinism within the policies and practices of the wider UN body? For example, through my work with the source of the Nile Union of Persons with Albinism in Uganda, I'm aware that in many huge refugee settlements across the country managed by the UNHCR, the need and rights of persons with albinism are completely overlooked and skin cancer rates are sky high. So I think they're asking just for your comments in relation to that.
Thank you, Jane. I think it's a pity that the UNHCR are actually not considering the needs of persons with albinism. This has been raised, and I believe there are even some guidelines that have been looked into, but sometimes people do, sometimes information does not trickle down to those on the ground who are actually delivering services. So yes, this is an issue that will definitely be raised, that it needs, the UN needs to ensure inclusion of persons with albinism, ensuring active participation, even in the development of these practices and policies. The need for sunscreen is important, and if this is not being provided, it is an issue that should be brought to my attention, just as you have done it, just as you have done now, and definitely something that can be raised with the UNHCR to make sure that there's more awareness of that. I do think that this is part of the reason why the mandate of the UN Independent Expert on the Rights of Persons with Albinism is important, because persons with albinism often get left behind, and it is important to have a mandate that focuses solely on albinism to raise concerns that are not included when we talk about disability rights widely or broadly. So yes, this is why it's quite important to focus on this specifically and ensure that persons with albinism are included. I have raised this in meetings that I have had, that we need to include albinism more as well in our discussions. When we have disaggregated data, we should include albinism as well. And this is something that I've continued to advocate for.
Thank you so much for that. It seems that another reoccurring question in the chat box is in relation to the AU's appointment of an envoy on albinism in Africa. So a series of participants have already asked the progress in relation to the appointment of the envoy and how you intend to basically promote the plan of action on albinism to the extent that it will be adopted and implemented by states across the continent.
Well, thank you. The envoy on albinism, the AU envoy on albinism, it's true that it's something that remains and as a plan, something that should be carried out and implemented. Last week, I was in the DRC for a meeting on albinism, a symposium on albinism, which was also organized by President Tshisekedi of the DRC, who is also the chair of the African Union. The issue of the envoy was raised there by myself and by other stakeholders there, and President Tshisekedi is aware of it, and it's an issue that is ongoing. I think it is important to have an AU envoy to also deal with the specific kind of concerns in relation to albinism on the African continent. I think the UN Independent Expert on Albinism obviously has a very broad mandate, and it's not to say that Africa would be neglected, not at all, but I think Africa also needs special attention from an AU envoy. The AU Plan of Action, I continue in all my engagements with state authorities to raise the AU Plan of Action, not just on a global basis, but also just to ask states to adopt national action plans. And many of these national action plans are based on the Plan of Action. And these national action plans are important. They need, because they provide an opportunity for different sectors to come together. So, we talk about a tax, and often when you talk about a tax, people only think about the justice sector. But we've talked about healthcare needs as well. So these plan of actions have to include healthcare needs. They have to include people from the education sector, the justice sector, employment sector, labor sector. And so it's important to have such national action plans. And very important as well is to have budgets allocated to these national action plans. So there have to be national action plans which are multi-sectorial, which have specific budget allocated to them. And in many cases, as I've said, these are based on the AU Plan of Action or the former Regional Action Plan.
Thank you so much for that. In fact, that sort of ties in with another question that has been put in the chat box in relation to the situation in Liberia in relation to persons with albinism, that persons with albinism are not necessarily targeted for rituals as in the case of other countries, but that they do face discrimination, stigmatization. And the question is there a plan for you to engage the government of Liberia to ensure that issues affecting persons with albinism are addressed, including a budgetary allotment for awareness raising and sensitization?
So the issue of stigma and discrimination and attitudinal barriers of the focus of the report that was delivered on Friday to the UN General Assembly. The report focused on, attitudinal barriers affecting persons with albinism worldwide. I must say, I don't recall Liberia being included in the report, but it is understandable that the concerns of most persons with albinism, especially the kind of discrimination and discrimination and stigmatization, it is one that persons with albinism face throughout the globe. So yes, information, once information is as well, I'll be more than happy to raise this with the authorities. And I think it is very important to receive this information and to receive the concerns so that we can feed back to the authorities that these are the concerns that persons with albinism are facing within the countries that we live. Again, sometimes the plight of persons with albinism can be quite invisible in some countries, particularly because persons with albinism are a minority group. But that is obviously does not mean that the concerns are not important. They're very important, and that's the reason why this mandate has been set up to raise these concerns.
Thank you so much for that. I have two questions here, and I think the first question sort of ties in with what you've been talking about in terms of the content that is available in relation to the reports around persons with albinism and what needs to be done and carried forward. And you've also spoken about the AU Plan of Action. There is a question from Ngeha. I hope I'm pronouncing their name properly. Sorry about that. They're from Cameroon, and they're basically saying that in light of all of the issues that are faced by persons with albinism, is there going to be a text to regulate this, and what other instruments maybe that you have not touched on are currently in place to deal with these violations? So maybe if you can think of any more resources that you'd like to touch on, maybe you can touch on that. And then there's another question here in relation to the registration of doctors to travel to different hospitals in Africa, whether there are works in the pipeline to encourage this, particularly from the standpoint of persons with albinism, to cut down on the bureaucracy so that maybe this then ties in with issues of access to health, specifically looking at the fact that skin cancer is something that is very prevalent in relation to persons with albinism.
Great, so I'll start with the first question. I'm not sure I understood the second question very well, but I'll start with the first question and then we can clarify the second question. So the first question was in relation to resources and any text available that highlight or that protect the rights of persons with albinism. So first of all, it's very important to say that persons with albinism have the same rights as everyone else. So the rights contained in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Women have the rights contained in the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And then there are also regional texts. So, at the Inter-Americas level, at the African level, there are lots of human rights instruments. And persons with albinism have the right to all these rights that are contained in these texts. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is also one that we can specifically raise in relation to persons with albinism, and the need to address the impairments that persons with albinism, it's a need to address the barriers which, when they interact with the impairments that persons with albinism have, prevent persons with albinism from enjoying their rights at the same level as other people. So the issue is addressing the barriers that exist in states, in a country. For example, when we talk about eyesight, why are persons with albinism not able to enjoy their right to health in the same way as everybody else? In many cases, it's because the state is not providing reasonable accommodation, adaptive, assistive devices and things like that. So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is very important in that relation. And at the African level, there's the Protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which still has to be ratified by states. I think at the moment, there are very few states that have ratified this, and states need to ratify it. This convention in Africa is actually the protocol in Africa is actually quite important for persons with albinism, because it actually specifically mentions persons with albinism. And I think it's the only charter or the only human rights treaty that specifically mentions persons with albinism. So those resources are very important. When it comes to specifically issues in relation to persons with albinism, I've mentioned the reports by the independent expert, which can be found on the independent experts page under reports, and the reports, you can find all the various reports that relate to this. There are also, and I think in relation to the reports, I would like to highlight once again the report on protection of the rights of persons with albinism, because this report kind of consolidates everything. It brings together all the human rights concerns and recommendations, be it in relation to access to justice, health, or education. So it's quite a useful resource. There are also other organizations that have developed resources, texts, such as the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute, that developed a report that's related to persons with albinism. And I think the report was called Waiting to Disappear. And then Amnesty International also has recently developed a manual for national human rights institutes looking to work on the rights of persons with albinism. And this manual is for national human rights institutions, but it can be used by anyone who's interested in the rights of persons with albinism, and it's quite comprehensive. So these are just a few resources that I would highlight in relation to working on the rights of persons with albinism and ensuring that persons with albinism are able to enjoy their rights.
Thank you so
much. And then
much.
the second question dealt with something to do with doctors and is it cross-border travel of doctors to assist with issues around skin cancer and skin cancer treatment. I'm not sure if you can clarify the question for me.
Yes, exactly. It was that, but specifically in relation to what can be done to ensure that the bureaucracy in relation to movement of doctors around the continent can be reduced or addressed, so that it allows for maybe more movement of doctors, and in that vein, maybe more access to healthcare services. That's how I understand the question to be. Yeah.
So I'm not sure about the bureaucracy. I actually wasn't unaware that there's a lot of bureaucracy around the movement of doctors around the continent. I think what is important is also to have doctors within each country that are capacitated and understand albinism and understand the risk of skin cancer. Doctors who are able to treat persons with albinism, not just in the center or in the big cities, but also in rural areas. So a lot more has to be done in relation to increasing the capacity of those doctors, whether it's through exchange programs, whether it's through taking doctors to learn more about skin cancer in different parts of the world and bringing them back to their countries to serve. I think that is important to have doctors available and accessible. So, there's a right to a high sustainable standard of health, and that includes ensuring accessible health services. So yes, I think that would be, and it's actually a recommendation that has been made by the independent expert in the past, by the mandate in the past, that states should focus on increasing the capacity and skills training of doctors in relation to skin cancer, but also, in relation to visual impairments and other concerns of persons with albinism.
Thank you so much. It seems our chat box is really flowing with a lot of questions, and they're quite interesting. I wonder if you would mind if I just loop together maybe 3 of them. Would that be all right?
That's okay.
So the first one that I see here is from Gladstone. And the question is, I would like to know what measures the UNHCR is taking to ensure that cases of killings and abductions of persons with albinism are concluded on time. I've noticed that some cases of this nature that are a violation of the right to life take too long to be concluded in courts. That's the first question. Then another question that I have is from the State Council in Malawi, Pacharo Kaira. And his question is, first of all, congratulations on this appointment. My question is how the mandate holder intends to work with regional human rights institutions such as the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in enhancing her outreach in Africa and also ensuring sharing of experiences and best practices. And the last question, well, to conclude the three, is a question from Sukati. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. The question is, I'm sorry to ask, but I think I should, that unlike IK Aero, who's a person living with albinism, how do you see yourself carrying out your mandate and adequately advocating for the rights of persons with albinism during your term? Since there are very sensitive issues with my condition, as they speak from that personal vantage point, I hope I am as relevant as possible to this meeting. That's the third question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'll try and address all the three questions. So conclusions of cases of the killings of persons with albinism. Yes, we are also concerned that in many cases, these cases take a long time to be finalized. And what has been seen is that in many cases, the concerns are in relation to investigations, whether there's lack of will or whether it's an issue of lack of capacity. Sometimes it's not always clear. But one of the things that the mandate has been calling for and that I will continue to call for is to ensure that the training of the training of police, those carrying out investigations, ensuring that judicial the judiciary, the judges are aware of the rights of persons with albinism, are aware of the relevant laws that apply in relation to these cases, as well as the prosecutors as well. It's important for prosecutors to understand what laws apply, to understand how cases can be properly prosecuted and concluded. Sometimes issues that have been raised is that there's lack of understanding or insufficient or poor investigations, which means that then it's hard for prosecutors to take these cases before courts and prosecute them adequately. Other times, the concerns that are raised is that it's the prosecutors who are not doing their jobs adequately, and that there's a poor understanding of the right charges or crimes that should be used in these cases. And there have also been concerns about the courts as well. A lot of times as well, we hear concerns that investigations are not able to be concluded because people are crossing, the perpetrators have come from across the border or allegedly come from across the border, and that the police are unable to go into another country to carry out the investigations, or that they do not have the right cooperation from neighboring countries to carry out the investigation. So in relation to this, the mandate has called for cross-border cooperation. It's something that I'll continue to call on. I'm interested in looking at cross-border cooperations and with the regional police bodies. I know some regional police bodies have cooperation, and they cooperate in issues related to trafficking of drugs, trafficking of human beings, trafficking of body parts, but they do not necessarily have a focus, trafficking of organs, sorry. They do not necessarily have a focus on the trafficking of persons with albinism. And this area tends to get left behind in cross-border cooperation. So once again, I think it's just emphasizing the need for training, more cooperation, including cross-border cooperation, training and capacity building of police, investigators, prosecutors, judges, capacity building and cooperation in relation to cross-border investigations in this regard. And I think just the importance of ensuring that this is done so that justice is done and justice is seen to be done as well, because it's important that people are held accountable. At the same time, we also don't want to rush cases where there's not sufficient evidence and cases are rushed and then they're not, it's impossible to hold anyone accountable because the cases were rushed without adequate investigation. So what is important is to ensure this, and it's issues that can be raised with authorities during the country visits that I would be undertaking and during my bilateral discussions with authorities on the need to ensure such capacity building and cross-border cooperation. With regards to the regional institutional collaboration, yes, I intend to continue collaborating. IK did a lot of amazing collaboration with the African Commission and the AU, and I've already been in touch with the African Commission, with the AU, and I intend to continue this collaboration. I think it's important to continue to advocate for the plan of action, the Pan-African Parliamentarian Guidelines on elimination of harmful practices. It's important to continue advocating for the adoption of the AU envoy on albinism, and it's important to continue working with with the AU and the African Commission to push for ratification of the protocol on disabilities, as well as the protocol on older persons, because that can also relate to older persons with albinism, who also have their own intersectional discrimination against them. So yes, I think it's important, and not just the African Union. I'm emphasizing African because I know that I'm presenting predominantly before an African panel, but I would be interested as well in those kind of relationships with other regional bodies as well, including the EU and the Inter-Americas and ASEAN and other regional bodies as well. And so I'd be looking into developing similar kind of collaborations. I think at the African level, because of their text, it's been quite pertinent to have the kind of collaboration there. The question on my being the mandate holder without having albinism, I think it's very important as well that the issue of albinism is not just seen as an issue for persons with albinism. As I've said, albinism, all human rights are interrelated, they're interconnected, they're universal. And any violation of human rights of anybody should be a concern for all of us. So I think having a mandate holder who does not have albinism also highlights the issue that this is not just a concern for persons with albinism, it's a concern for all of us. And as I highlighted at the beginning of my mandate, my intention, and even beginning of today, my intention is not to replace the voices of persons with albinism, it's to amplify the voices of persons with albinism. And in order to do that, it is important for me to be listening, receiving information, speaking to persons with albinism, which I have done prior to taking up this mandate, and I will continue to do as the independent expert on albinism. I 100% subscribe to the position that nothing should be done for us without us. And us in this case does not include me because I'm talking about persons with albinism. So nothing should be done for persons with albinism without persons with albinism. And so the way that I work is to ensure that in anything that I'm doing, I'm continually working with persons with albinism, associations of persons with albinism. I have regular meetings with the Global Albinism Alliance. I hope to have regular meetings with the African Albinism Alliance. I hope to build similar relationships throughout the globe, and in any country that I work on, or I'm always constantly in touch with persons with albinism to understand their concerns. But I do think it is also important for it to be clear that this is not just a concern for persons with albinism, it's a concern for all of us, and we all have to raise our voices in relation to this.
Thank you so much for this. I think I may have to loop another 3 questions again. It seems that we have a very, very busy chat box here. So as another question, this is from Busani Bafana. It says, the question is, are the national action plans that were alluded to by you earlier backed by enforceable laws? Or are these voluntary actions that government cannot be held accountable to fulfill, as one point? And then as another question, it is from Rebecca, and the question is, what is the UN Independence Experts plan on the protection of albinism human rights defenders that are at risk? Is it possible for the UN independent expert to work with the special rapporteur for human rights defenders in ensuring that albinism human rights defenders are protected? That's another question. And then another question that we have is in relation to, is from Sylvia, and it's in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement. And she says that as far as I'm aware, there has never been any support or advocacy in relating to persons with albinism in this movement, yet it is the Black community who shouts the loudest against persons with albinism. There just seems to be a deafening silence in relation to the killings of persons with albinism. Seems like more of a comment in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement and advocating for the rights of persons with albinism. Maybe if you have any comments on these three, I can move on to the next three. Thank you.
Great. I'm certainly receiving a grilling today, so I'm just going to take a bit of water. Make sure that I can speak again. Great. I'm very glad actually that people are engaging and are asking these questions, because it's also showing me the concerns that people have and that need to be addressed, or information that some people have maybe not received that needs to be highlighted as well. So with regards to the National Action Plan, are there enforceable laws? In some ways, there are enforceable laws in the sense that every country has laws against discrimination and laws that protect and promote the right to equality. So, the right to equality includes the right to have steps taken, measures put into place to ensure that persons with albinism are able to enjoy the right at the same level as other people, people who do not have albinism. And so the National Action Plan in most cases tend to be policy statements. There are strategies developed by authorities, but like every other policies, strategies, commitments made, states can be held accountable for that, because if the states sit down and agree and develop a national action plan, this is a commitment that they have made, and they can be held accountable by citizens for not implementing these national action plans. And like I said, the right to equality and non-discrimination is included in most countries' laws. So we're talking about education, the right to education of persons with albinism. The right to education is included in most countries' constitution. And the National Action Plan is just a way of ensuring that persons with albinism are able to enjoy that right. It's the same with health, the same with access to justice. If the authorities are not accountable through reference to national laws and particularly the Constitution. The question on human rights defenders and albinism, I'm so glad to hear this, because one of the next reports that I am thinking of doing, one of the upcoming reports, is the issue on human rights defenders, specifically human rights defenders working on issues of albinism. I do recognize that there are concerns, because in a lot of cases, human rights defenders working on the area of albinism tend to be persons with albinism themselves. There are also concerns, I know, like some people have raised concerns about threats that they receive, because when we deal with attacks against persons with albinism, sometimes these are high-powered people who can then threaten human rights defenders. I have recently received concerns from human rights defenders who say they're being threatened because of their work in this area. So yes, the issue of human rights defenders and albinism is one that that is definitely on my plate, and one that I intend to work on going forward. And I'm constantly in contact with other mandate holders, and that will be raised. But I think it is important to have a report, a standalone report, and then we can use this to further raise concerns. I must also highlight that there was a section, and I'm sorry if I keep going back to this report, but there was a section on the report on the protection of the rights of persons with albinism, which dealt with human rights defenders. So I think it was a paragraph there, and the protection of human rights defenders in relation to albinism. But I do recognize that there is a need to do more of that. And I very much look forward to receiving information from human rights defenders out there working on issues of albinism. I'm very much interested in integrating albinism in the wider human rights work, because I do realize that when we have discussions on issues of protection of human rights defenders, those working on albinism are very rarely, if at all, included in those conversations. And so it is important for us to integrate that, so that when we're having discussions on human rights defenders, people include those, human rights defenders working on albinism. So again, I wholeheartedly welcome any information that you have in relation to human rights defenders working on albinism. Any challenges you may have, any concerns you may have, please do forward that information to me. I am available to have discussions, and that would be very useful in helping me develop the report on human rights defenders. I cannot speak for the Black Lives Matter movement, but I do think that it's important to recognize that when we're talking about persons with albinism, if there are persons with albinism, because persons with albinism are any race, can be of any race. And if we're talking about persons with albinism who are Black people, despite their coloring, then the Black Lives Matter movement also applies to them. And of course, I am aware that the Black Lives Matter movement has been very strongly, predominantly more in, especially places like in America, because of the kind of nuances and the specific situations there. And in Africa, I think being predominantly more Black continent, predominantly, not only, but predominantly, the issues that the Black Lives Matter movement is, of course, is important, but it has not been manifested in the same way. And I think, I can't speak to whether they're dealing, whether they have specifically mentioned albinism, but I would think that if they are referring to persons with albinism who are Black people, then they are included in the Black Lives Matter movement as well.
Thank you so much for that. It seems that we have an individual, Fidele Nelson, who's saying, thank you so much for highlighting the issues specifically around persons with albinism who are in refugee camps. And they draw a particular personal story in that it seems that she is also a refugee in the same sort of context. And she says, I personally had and still am living with attacks. And when we report such, they don't help within the camps in terms of, they don't even help us or even solve some of these challenging situations that we are facing. I have even been forcefully displaced from the refugee camp I was into another one, lost everything of mine, leaving my career and more other things behind. So how am I to be helped here? She says that she's in a refugee camp in Uganda. Yeah.
So I think the issues of refugee camps seem to, sorry, I'll just deal with this. I know you may have other questions, but this seems to keep coming up, and it's like the second time that it's come up. Again, I would invite people to engage with me bilaterally so that we can understand the situation specifically. I'm sorry, at the moment, I'm not using a laptop because I am in South Africa and we're experiencing load shedding, which means that I've had to use my phone rather than my laptop. So I can't include my email address in the chat, but it is, available also on the website. And I would invite people to get in touch with me. I think that it's just been put up there by the Center for Human Rights there. Please do get in touch with me. Let's have this discussion bilaterally. Let's look into what's happening in the camps and see how we can raise these concerns and move this forward.
Thank you so much for that. It seems that also a lot of the participants are also writing about some of the work that they're doing in relation to their organizations. That seems really interesting. I saw one particular comment about how there's an organization that has started cross-border police collaborations on cases of FGM between Kenya and Tanzania. Good to perhaps integrate these issues in these meetings. There was a cross-border declaration to end FGM signed between Kenya, Tanzania, Somalia, Uganda, and Ethiopia. The police work is part of that. That was from Anna Holmstrom. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Yeah, it seems like we have quite a bit here as well. I saw another interesting comment about the work that's being done in Tanzania. Where this is a post that's been posted by Beatrice, and it's talking about the work that has been done with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Tanzania, southeast of Lake Victoria Diocese, in partnership with FALM, which has done a great job of fighting the killings and mutilation of body parts of persons with albinism. We work closely with the government, traditional healers, traditional leaders, and religious leaders to stop the harmful practices that harm persons with albinism. As we participate today, we feel energized to continue our fight. We have also put effort in empowering girls with albinism, who are in fact mostly affected because of traditional beliefs. And maybe linking this with all of the amazing work that's being linked in the chat box, there's a question from Sukati that talks about the plans in relation to the mandate, in relation to maintaining the current networks, in relation to persons with albinism, and also how these networks could be improved, maybe looking at the different organizations that are in the space. How do you intend to make the mandate most accessible to these organizations across the continent?
Great, thank you. So I have had some connections with a number of organizations in the past. It is true that there are lots of organizations that I'm still not in touch with, but that's part of the reason why we're having such interactive discussion and interactive dialogue. And I think this is a really great idea. I am interested in having similar chats in other continents as well, and just making myself available for discussions with individuals and with associations of persons with albinism. I continue to work with kind of regional and sub-regional bodies of persons with albinism, and hopefully be able to get more contacts through those as well, through any country visits that I carry out as well. And once again, my email address is available on the UN website. So, please feel free to contact me, and we can have more engagements and discussions on concerns in relation to albinism and specific concerns in different countries and different regions as well.
Thank you so much for that. It seems that we also have a question from Kwame Andrews Daklo. Maybe he can also just take the floor.
Thank you, Ramo, as we popularly call you. Once again, this has been bothering me. Like, I've done some work, especially in my country, Ghana. There's a situation where some communities do not allow persons with albinism to enter such communities. And this has been reported to IK in 2020, I think, and we had an extensive discussion. So how do you continue from where IK has left to address this issue of us not entering some communities in Ghana?
So this is, again, related to the report that we've just raised. And I think that was also highlighted in the report, that there are communities in Ghana that do not allow persons with albinism to enter. And it was brought before the UN General Assembly, and in the report that was presented there on attitudinal barriers against persons with albinism. It is an issue that would be raised in bilateral discussions with the country, with authorities. And again, it also relates to the UN resolution we referred to, on elimination of harmful practices based on accusations of witchcraft or ritual attacks. I'm not too sure, what the specific reasons are for that, but it is a harmful practice, and it's an issue that should be eliminated within the context of that UN resolution, and also the Pan-African guidelines on elimination of harmful practices as well. I mentioned the idea that the UN resolution calls for a study on this to get more information and understanding. And I think that's information that should be also be fed into that study in that context. And also, I mean, we talked about the CRPD, we talked about the African Commission, and I think it's also important for organizations and associations to raise these concerns in the context of the Universal Periodical Review, in the context of the treaty body reviews, the African Commission reviews, and any bilateral discussions that they may be having with state authorities. It's also important for those to be raised by organizations and associations, as I will as well raise these concerns.
Thank you so much for that. It seems that we really have grilled you today, but thank you so much for being able to just stay afloat in light of all of these amazing questions. We're supposed to close our questions and answer session at 5:10, and I have 2 more questions left for you that I think maybe I could ask you at this point, and maybe just to allay any reservations or concerns by participants that perhaps for the questions that we haven't sort of captured, there's always ample opportunity to email them to you if any. But I think we've captured a bulk of the questions that needed to be asked. So I'll just ask these last 2 questions, and then we can then prepare for our vote of thanks. And those last 2 questions are, okay, so the first one is associations of persons with disability, persons with albinism and other organizations working with them are willing to embark on public education and sensitization programs. However, their biggest challenge is funding. So what do you...
You want to take me?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask. I think there's somebody who has their microphone on. Could you please mute it, because it's hard to hear the question.
Exactly, no problem. I've managed to mute them. So the question was in relation to funding, that there are so many activities in relation to public education, community sensitization programs, but that funding seems to be the biggest hurdle. So the question is, what do you intend to do to attract potential donors to fund activities of these organizations, especially in Africa? And the last question is in relation to the fact that South Africa had declared September as the National Albinism Awareness Month. Do you think that this should be replicated across the continent? And what strategies will your mandate adopt to ensure this? Those would be our last 2 questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So in relation to funding for public education and sensitization, I should say that the National Action Plan calls for such funding as well. So in many cases, in some countries, I believe in Malawi as well, they have had funding going directly to associations of persons with albinism to carry out such education and sensitization programs. So it does remain the responsibility of the state to ensure that public education and sensitization is carried out. And one way is to ensure that this is included in the National Action Plan. Another way as well is through donor funding, donor engagement. And the importance of this mandate of my role is to highlight the concerns of persons with albinism, to highlight albinism as a human rights concern. And I think in the process of doing that, hopefully then donors and international funders will become aware of the idea that this is an issue that they should also be funding. And I know that a lot has already been done in that regard. And since the start of this mandate, in 2015, a lot more organizations are funding work on albinism and human rights in relation to albinism. And it's just the importance of raising this a bit more. And also just to reiterate the importance of ensuring that the state is providing funding for those associations in the National Action Plan. Should Albinism Awareness Month be Albinism Awareness Day? Because I'm not sure if everybody is aware that June 13th is the International Albinism Awareness Day. And the question is whether we should have this extended to a month as it has been done in South Africa. I think first and foremost, it's important for countries to recognize International Albinism Awareness Day, and some countries haven't done that actually. So as the first point, I would say important to recognize International Albinism Awareness Day, importance to recognize, to promote positive stories, to promote, to tackle the negative stereotypes associated with albinism, to ensure that there are people of high profile with albinism, to ensure that persons with albinism are visible on, in the media in a positive way, to ensure that the media is not using negative portrayal of persons with albinism. And this is important, and it's something that must be done throughout the year, not just on International Albinism Awareness Day, not just on International Albinism Awareness Month. I think if we could have an International Albinism Awareness Month as it is done in South Africa, that would be great. If not, this is something that should be done throughout the year, and it should not just be reserved for one day and or 1 month, but as well as to ensure that at least International Albinism Awareness Day is recognized, because it is important to highlight this and so for people to stop and reflect on International Albinism Awareness Day and the concerns and the rights of persons with albinism.
Indeed, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for just being able to address all of the questions that we have run past you. And with this, I'd just like to encourage—
Thank you. Sorry, just before you go, I also wanted to just take the time to thank, I believe that this was organized predominantly by the students of the University of Venda and University of Pretoria, and also to thank the University of Venda and University of Pretoria for hosting this, for thinking of such an idea. I think it's been a great initiative. Well done to you all for thinking of it and bringing this forward. And just to reiterate that I would be more than interested in doing a similar in different continents, in different languages. I do not speak very many other languages, but we could always have translators. So thank you again for inviting me and for hosting this.
Thank you so much, and well done to all of those groups that came together to make this a success that it is. And this conversation was broadcasted on the Center for Human Rights Facebook page, and also on the YouTube page. So if you're able to just visit those pages and share them widely across your platforms, it would really help in terms of this conversation gaining momentum and creating awareness in relation to the rights of persons with albinism in the African continent and also all across the world. So with that, we thank you so much to Muluka Anne for her time. And now we cross over into our concluding remarks, just to nip this entire day into a bud and to say our thank yous. And in terms of our concluding remarks, I'd like to call Ms. Diana Masipa, who is the acting manager for the Disability Rights Unit under the Center for Human Rights. Diana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ramu, and good afternoon to everyone. It has been such a pleasure to listen to the rich and meaningful discussions between all the participants and the new UN independent expert on the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism, Ms. Muluka and Miti-Drummond. May I take this opportunity to congratulate her on her appointment as the new UN independent expert on albinism. So the Disability Rights Unit at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, has a long-standing commitment to the promotion of the rights of persons with albinism in Africa. And one of the ways that we contribute to the promotion of rights of persons with albinism is by providing support to the mandate of the UN independent expert on the enjoyment. You've heard we've worked very closely with the former independent expert, Ms. during her term, and together we have seen a number of and impactful activities. Some of the activities, I think you've already heard them being mentioned. We've worked together on a range of activities, including capacity building for civil society organizations, including providing support production of reports to the Human Rights Council, in the drafting of the regional action plan on albinism, in the drafting of the guidelines for African persons with albinism, as well as providing input on the draft South African National Action Plan on Albinism, which is being spearheaded by the South African National Albinism Task Force. So these are just some of the examples of some of the activities that the unit, especially under the leadership of my predecessor, Innocentia Mugijima, has been involved in. So I'd really like to acknowledge her particular input to all that work. Going forward, we pledge our support to the new independent expert, Ms. Miti-Drummond, as she takes over the baton from Ms. Ero, and we look forward to achieving great things and ultimately improving the enjoyment of human rights by all persons with albinism in Africa. However, none of this can be possible without the involvement of all of the family members, the friends, and the civil society organizations that work tirelessly on a daily basis to make a difference in the lives of persons with albinism. You are all the real champions, and we only to Ms. Miti-Drummond, but also to the greater cause by attending today's event and making it a success. We are grateful especially to Ms. Miti-Drummond for availing herself for this informal chat with us all. And I would also like to thank the former UN independent expert, Ms. Ero, for also showing her support and participating in today's event, despite the fact that it was an awkward hour for her in Canada. And I'd also like to thank our director at the Center for Human Rights, Professor Frans Viljoen, for his unwavering support and leadership. I'd also like to extend Venda for their input and participation. I won't mention names in case I leave out anyone. To say that this event would not have been possible without you, and we are grateful for your participation. And I especially, who is the Human Rights and Democratization in Africa Master's student for today's event. Thanks also to Ramu Jallow for her competent moderation of this event. Colleagues from the Disability Rights Unit, as well as the Communications Unit at the Center for Human Rights, for also their hard work in making this event possible. As the old African adage goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. I believe that we all share a common desire to go far in promoting the rights of persons with albinism in Africa. Therefore, I look forward to us all going together. Thank you. Back to you, Ramu.
Thank you so much for those amazing words, Diana, and we really appreciate all the work that has been done by the three offices that have really come together to put their heads together to create this amazing platform that's an opportunity for people to network in the space and also to create further awareness around the rights of persons with disabilities and also the mandate of the UN independent expert. And just to close off our concluding remarks, I'd also like to call Dr. Mbuva, who's the head of the Disability Student Unit at the University of Venda. And from then, I'd just like to ask that we just hang on this call for a couple of minutes. After that, there'll be an evaluation of this event just to carry it forward as we plan to have more conversations in light of this. It would be helpful to know where improvement can be made and where further insight can be shared. So if you could just hold on after this last concluding remarks for the evaluation, followed then by a group photo. And I'd like to open the floor to Dr. Mbuva.
Thank you, Ramon, for the opportunity that you have afforded to me. I won't repeat what my colleague Diana has said about thanking all the speakers, but I cannot leave out the people who collaborated and put together this event, like Disability Rights Unit in the University of Pretoria and Disabled Student Unit at the University of Venda as well, and the UN independent expert for putting this first live chat. And we are hoping that we are going to see more chats where we talk about this readily spoken topic about persons with albinism. And for long, persons with disability, with albinism, endure structural and systematic discrimination across Southern Africa. You know, they continue to live in fear as they are hunted everywhere they go. They are killed, their body parts are taken away, thinking that their body parts can be used as muti or can heal some of the ailments that are in our country or in our continent. Some believe that their body parts can be used even if they are dead in their grave. Their graves are tampered with. Some of them, they even tampered with their remains. Their remains are stolen because there are a lot of myths around persons with albinism. I've heard one of the speakers saying about when a child is born, the women suffer discrimination from the husband and the family members. It can even lead to divorce and mental and physical abuse when they see such child born in a family. Now, the main speaker here, our independent expert, I'm very happy to know that Anne was once one of our students at the University of Venda. I'm proud of that. And I think we have laid a foundation for Anne. She mentioned about the healthcare system or the healthcare services for persons with disabilities. Their accessibility to the healthcare services is still a challenge. And many of them die of skin cancer. And I would like to suggest to Anne that why can't we start advocating for the skin cream or protective creams for persons with albinism? Because some of them, they even drop out from schools due to their injury or damage in their skins. And, you know, because of their vision impairment, some of them, they happen to drop out of the school and they become unemployed as they are not educated. And that means majority of persons with albinism, they will live in poverty. And it means that the advocacy for their needs is going to be a problem throughout life. Now, as we come together as practitioners and organizations that deal with persons and students with albinism, I think we can come up with the policies and the guidelines that will be implemented by different parts of our government and also UN, AU, so that we can break this barrier that has been so much having negative impact on our persons with albinism. On that note, colleagues, I'm wishing ourselves the best for the journey that we have started, and all the best to you, the current appointee for the UN independent expert on your mandate. We are going to support you and Whenever you call us, we are going to respond to your call. On that note, colleague, I thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those amazing words just to close us off and to recenter us on what we have aimed to achieve here. And I think with that, it presents a great opportunity to close our event for the day. But as mentioned, before we close, there is an evaluation and the link has been shared in the chat box. There were a few indications that that there was a need for permission there, but I think that has been rectified now. So I think if you could just take a couple of minutes to just go through the evaluation and just give your insight in relation to this event and how it could be further improved, it would go a very long way. Here's another link that has been shared by the Center for Human Rights in the chat box. So just be sure to click on that link and then we can take it from there. Okay, it seems it has not been rectified yet. Is this on the new link? Okay, it seems like there's still a bit of a problem there. So maybe what we can do in the meantime, the rectified link will be sent to all participants. So I think that would really solve then the problem. That would be great. Thank you so much. And just before we go, perhaps we can just all, if you're comfortable, have your cameras on and we can take a group picture just to mark the close of our day and to just extend a really warm thank you to our UN independent expert, Anne-Muluka Anne, for sparing the time, and to all of you for participating and sharing such immense insight on the ground in relation to what's happening on the rights of persons with albinism. So with that, I think we'll call on Kwame to give us a screenshot. Yeah. So I'll count us down and we'll all know when to smile. Okay, ready, set, cheese. All right, just one more minute. Maybe we can have another. Should we have another one?
Yeah.
Okay. Just one more, maybe we can have another one more cheese. 1, 2, 3, cheese. Great. All right, thank you so much everyone and enjoy the rest of your day and until we meet next time for the next conversation. Bye.
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 Bye, colleagues. Thank you for the invite. We're looking forward.
Bye. From Nigeria. Bye-bye from Nigeria.
Bye from Tanzania.
Bye-bye from Uganda.
Bye-bye from Switzerland.
Bye from Cameroon.
Bye-bye from Mozambique.
Bye from Cameroon.
Bye from Liberia.
Africa. And
bye from Malawi.
Bye-bye from Mozambique. Bye-bye, Mozambique.
Bye-bye from Switzerland.